Dr. Bruce Pohlot. Welcome to the Marlin Podcast.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, thanks for joining us, man. And we are here at your office here at the IGFA headquarters. Well, not your office. We're in the library, the E.K. Harry Library of Fishes at the IGFA headquarters. But you work just upstairs. And, just before we get going here, I had the pleasure of working with you for 5 or 6 years at IGFA before starting here in Marlin. And for those people that aren't familiar with Bruce, I know you get around to quite a few tournaments in the community, but you're the conservation director here at IGFA. So you run all of their conservation advocacy policy programs, including the Great Marlin Race, which we'll talk on significantly. Your background, you have a doctorate, or I'm saying that right, you're a doctor in marine biology, is that correct?
Yeah, the PhD is in marine biology and fisheries.
And we'll talk, again, get into that. And then I know I'm going to butcher all these acronyms here, but in terms of like the different panels and things that you sit on. So you're on the NOAA HMS panel, you're on the ICAT advisory panel, and then the IATTC General Advisory Committee as well, correct?
Yep, you nailed it.
All right, man. So you keep very busy. And lack of a better terms, I know you. We've not only worked together, but we've fished, we've hung out, we've worked on different projects together. So it's awesome to be talking with you here about this stuff, because I feel like we've had a lot of these conversations before, and it's like super enlightening, and I think that people will enjoy it. So thank you again for joining us, and thanks for having us here at the IGFA.
Oh yeah, man, this is awesome. Happy when I found out you guys were doing a podcast, I was excited. So this is all very cool. I'm happy to be here.
Yeah. So I think one of the last times we hung out, we saw you at ICAST, but then it was almost a year ago. You had been working on setting up the billfish symposium, which was it the 8th one?
It was the 7th.
7th one. Okay. So it was the 7th International Billfish Symposium. It was in San Diego, which was a great event. I mean, I was there for like 2 days of it. And, but anyways, tell me a little bit about what that is, because I know you like led putting that whole thing on.
Yeah. So it's the Billfish Symposium series. Again, it was the 7th one. The first one I think was in the early 70s. But it's a conference that kind of brings all the world's billfish experts together to present their research that they've done since the last one, and it's really the only scientific meeting that brings all of these people together and focuses exclusively on billfish. And it's the istiophorid billfish, so like the marlin, sailfish, spearfish, and then a little bit of swordfish too. And there was a couple in there that had, some tuna research as well. But it's, it's a really important meeting. It's one of the meetings that actually kind of kicked off my career. So I was early on in my graduate student work. I think I had just finished my master's in I finished it in 2011, and then in 2013 was the 5th Billfish Symposium, which was in Taiwan. And I was just kind of getting into the billfish world, and it became like a really important meeting for me, because I went there. It was in Taipei. It was a really big meeting, and it was, I gave presentations, and I got to meet like the kind of the forefathers of billfish research, like the John Graves type people and the Julian Pepperells, and got to know them and kind of got my foot in the door into billfish research. And then so the next one, the 6th one, was actually held here downstairs in 2016, presented at that one. When Jason ran it, Jason Schratweiser, IGFA's president now. And so, it had been a long time. It was the 2016 to 2024. So there was a lot of research had been done. And I think like late 2022, maybe there was a few people that were saying, hey, like we should be doing this. Like we should have another billfish symposium. And it was like, oh, that's a lot of work. That's a lot of stuff. And I was already, we didn't have any help here yet, so I was kind of just the conservation director.
You were a one-man team.
Yeah, and so it was adding like a major thing to that. So I was a little concerned about it, but it was something I kind of knew I wanted to do at some point, because Jason did an awesome job when it was here, and it's one of those meetings that actually kind of kickstarted my career. So. Got it all put together. Luckily, got some really great people that came in with funding support. The Mid-Atlantic tournament, Rick Weber was a major part of that, and then NOAA came in with some money too. So we pulled it together really fast. Luckily we have a lot of contacts in Southern California, and we had to find a place to hold it where you get people coming from Australia, from Asia, from potentially Europe and Africa. So it's like, where do you have it? You know, originally we were like, we're going to do it in New Jersey or something. And then the people from Asia that were on the steering committee were like, we're not going to come to New Jersey. And it's like, well, what if we did it in New York or like in Manhattan? Like everybody can get there. And they were like, no, we're still not going to come. It's like, all right, well, how about the West Coast? And they're like, okay, we'll come. Because we know there's a lot of research done in Asia on billfish. And so found out San Diego was going to work the best, started organizing everything. This was between me, Rob Kramer at Wild Oceans, and, our crew here at IGFA. We kind of pulled it all together really fast, organized all the presentations, kind of like all the catering, everything. Right. It was a ton of work. But it came together really well. I think we had over 100 people. It was like 108 people or 106 people, something like that. We had, I think, every continent besides Antarctica was represented. Yeah. And got a lot of really interesting results. And I think the most important part of the meeting was at the end of each day was kind of themed. So like the first day was a satellite tagging day, like, not just satellite tagging, but movement, behavior, that kind of stuff. Second day was, basic biology, genetics, fisheries stuff. The third day was human dimensions, more fisheries, and some other kind of talks mixed in, and management and everything. So you get the billfish scientists, the academics, you get the people that work for the different management groups, and then you get a lot of anglers. That's kind of one of the unique things about the Billfish Symposium is that we invite anglers to come and participate. So we had some big name anglers come, ask some really good questions, like Bill Boyce was there, Anthony Shea was there, and provide their input, which is really valuable because a lot of there's always kind of a disconnect between the academic community and like the actual fishing community. Right. And so to get all those people together is always helpful. But going back to what I was saying, at the end of each day, there was a discussion section about like kind of what was discussed that day and like what are the important topics that should be discussed in this field. So it was cool in a way that, we got all these people together to talk about the issues, but like it was kind of a bummer in some ways because we still don't know so much. Right. There's still so much we need to learn to even consider properly managing these things. So that there's kind of a give and take there, but overall the meeting went really well. I think everybody was really happy with it. Right. And I guess we're gonna have to figure out when the next one's gonna be. I'm thinking maybe 4 or 5 years down the road. So I'll give it enough time for more research to build up. Well, I found it to be an incredible experience. I was there for like a day and a half, 2 days before jumping down to Cabo for a tournament. But it was, I felt dumb for those 2 days I was there. I mean, you sit in these panels and it was just like, what are these people talking about? And like you said, like the diversity of people represented. I feel like, being here in the States and in this world, you hear like, like you said, the John Graves or like, the Eric Princes, guys like that who are like, the key researchers in conservation, kind of masterminds with billfish, but Barbara Blocks, but then you go to a meeting like that and it's like, holy cow, there's this whole, there's people from Africa, that, Europe, everywhere. It was really impressive to see that there's really this global, like, I don't want to call it support team, but this global network of people that are so interested in billfish and like very, very interested in billfish. And, I found it to be very interesting. And I found, I'm trying to think of what, major takeaways I got, but I remember, I think it was Barbara Block was saying something while she was there. It was like, they're talking about the different technology that we need to do to kind of connect some of the dots. And I think genetic testing was one of them for billfish that will help determine a lot of different things, like whether it be movement or like their population structure, things like that. And the cool thing was it was kind of like, I guess, positive, but also challenging. It was like the technology exists for this to be done. Yeah. We just need to get the right people to care to get this done. And, unfortunately, we'll just segue into this. Like that kind of goes along with, kind of billfish in terms of the conservation that, if you want to say overshadows them or umbrellas them, is that they're kind of like the redheaded stepchild that they take second seat to more commercially viable species such as like tuna and swordfish. So like the measures of conservation and management that tuna and swordfish that they receive don't necessarily trickle down to billfish and they don't get as much protection. So anyway, we're gonna just kind of talk about that. Like, billfish in general are kind of an afterthought in the management community. there are very few markets around the world that specifically focus on billfish. Their value is obviously significantly less, other than some rare instances like Hawaii striped marlin. Like sometimes they'll sell for a lot. Or we had talked previously about the black marlin in Taiwan, but other than that, for the most part, billfish aren't worth as much.
So let's hold on one second. So, we were talking about that before we jumped on here, and so I remember we were at the symposium. There was, as you were saying, like a lot of times there's no markets for like marlin, right? Like it's not commercially viable like a yellowfin tuna. But you said in Taiwan, there's where it's for black marlin, correct? And they harpoon them.
Yeah, so I don't know if this is still the case, but back in 2013 when I was there, the billfish symposium was like sponsored by the government there, and so they did a lot of showing kind of how they fish and like the sustainable ways they kind of approach some of the fisheries. Like they showed us the sharks they use for shark fin soup, and they showed us a video of how they kill black marlin, and it's wild because they harpoon them, and it's. I've seen a lot of harpoon videos from the U.S. for bluefin for swordfish and stuff. It's not quite like that. It's a little more intense, and so they had, and it's valuable because it's a perfect condition because you're killing it right there, so you get real high quality. And we ate it, and it was it was good. Yeah. I thought it was tuna. I didn't believe it was black marlin.
Was it darker, like darker meat, like a tuna?
Like I truly thought it was like a bluefin or a yellowfin tuna, or big eye or something.
How big of a fish, do you know? Or did you just
I
see
think they're generally
product?
bigger fish because they're it's a pretty big setup. So they're I think they're focusing on the bigger ones. They don't kill that many. It's hard as hell to harpoon.
I can't even imagine, dude. Like,
they don't spend that much time.
Bask,
I guess they bask there. But I don't think it's easy. So I think it's kind of a sustainable fishery just because it's so hard to catch them that they're not killing a ton of them.
Right.
But like that kind of leads to something important. Like black marlin is, I think, the perfect example for the many issues that billfish face. We have no idea about like most population dynamic type things. So like how old they get, we think we know how big they get just from fisheries, but we are completely incapable of actually assessing the health of that population. Like we don't have any of we have some of the information, but we don't have enough of the information to say black marlin are in a healthy condition in the Pacific Ocean, black marlin are in a healthy condition in the Indian Ocean. For the most part, a lot of the fisheries in the Indian Ocean are not healthy. Like striped marlin's terrible there. Blue marlins, it's grossly overfished. But we use black marlin as an example because they just list it as data deficient. So we at this point really don't have much hope to actually be able to assess, let alone set up management techniques and that lead to conservation. So it's a sign of how much more information we still need to get. And like going back to the original topic, which was the how billfish are kind of an afterthought. We're most likely not going to get that from commercial fisheries because they're bycatch. They're not targeted. The market's not very big, and so as a bycatch species, the research that needs to be done has to be funded by somebody. And so who is going to fund it if the governments aren't going to fund it because it's not a valuable enough thing to them? It's kind of left to the communities that care most about them. So it ends up, being groups like us and, really the recreational fishing community. Luckily, the recreational fishing community for billfish, has the capacity to do it. But it's still, we talk all the time about what it would take to answer all of our questions, to do like, you mentioned the advances in genetics. It's not cheap to do that stuff. Satellite tagging, it's incredibly expensive. They're $4,000 to $5,000 for each tag, and you really should be putting hundreds of them out there, every year to see what's going on with each species. So it's unbelievably expensive, and we always say, imagine if everybody who fished for billfish just donated 1 tank of gas worth of funds. Like we would have a lot of money to do this kind of stuff.
True.
But unfortunately, it's hard. It's hard because there's few groups doing it. The symposium was a majority of the billfish research community. It's 100 people around the world.
Right.
So
not that much.
Yeah, and it's a really small group of people. The tuna conference is massive. You get lots of people coming from all over.
Let me ask you something back. What you were saying about black marlin and how they're the perfect example, right?
Yeah.
Like for kind of like a theme for billfish overall, right? Like we know some, but kind of like tip of the iceberg. We don't know as much as we need to to understand them fully. So for black marlin, you say they're listed as data deficient, and we don't know enough. So what, just, for me and for the regular angler out there that, isn't tuned into this stuff, would that mean a ground level stock assessment that needs to be done on black marlin in certain areas? Like, what would be, I guess, like, if you were to simplify a process that would need to take place, and I know it's super complicated to get these things done, but let's just say in a perfect world, X, Y, and Z need to happen for black marlin to get to a point where we say, yes, it's good, or no, it's not good.
Yeah. So the stock assessment process is incredibly complex. All of the inputs that need to go in there, and if any one of those inputs, so it's usually like a statistical model that tries to estimate abundance, stuff like that. And so to get that, you need to know age and growth. How many are out there, when they spawn, at what size age do they spawn. How
do people know that? Like, how do people know that about species that we know that about?
So a good example is there are research programs out there. Mexico has a really good one in Cabo, where if you go out and catch a striped marlin, bring it to the dock, they'll open it up and they'll look and they'll say, okay, this fish is this size. We see it was prime for spawning, or it had eggs or something in it, and then you can say, okay, well, this is the smallest size that we see. Reproductive capable fish.
Okay.
And you say, okay, well, what age is that fish? And then you can figure out from there kind of, at what they use the term is L50. So it's the length at which 50% of the of the population will be mature and capable of spawning. We're actually doing a project right now on that for striped marlin.
And they determine age, is that through the ear bone?
No, see, that's one of the hard things. That's another thing that makes billfish hard. In a snapper or grouper, you can go out here. We're in Florida and catch one, and they have otoliths, which are they call them ear stones.
I'm glad you
ear
pronounced
bones.
that. I know I was going to mispronounce it.
But and they're big, and you can count rings like you do on a tree, kind of.
Okay.
With billfish, they're like microscopic, so it's really hard. So they use fin spines, and they can. I think there's other things that they can do now. That's not really my specialty,
Gotcha.
but that's like age and growth information. The structure of the stock. So. With striped marlin, there's an Eastern Pacific. It's managed as separate stocks. There's Eastern Pacific, Western, Central Pacific. Then you have New Zealand, and
how are those stocks different? Like, so what makes a stock a stock? Is it like, are those the ones in the striped marlin in the Eastern Pacific, which would be like what, SoCal, Cabo, whatever?
Yeah.
Those are those genetically different than the ones?
So they should be.
Okay.
So yeah. So to a stock should be a genetically distinct group. But what we're learning with striped marlin is that they're mixing. So with any population, to estimate how many are out there, you need to know emigration stuff. Right. So you need to know if they're mixing. Are they all one big group? With blue marlin, the whole Pacific is managed as one big stock. Where striped marlin is separate. So and with black marlin, like, we have no idea. It could be different in the Indian or in that. I don't think that we know that. I mean, maybe there's a study out there that I haven't seen, but you need to know that's just one of the inputs for the stock assessment.
And so what we're saying here is that striped marlin, because they have those different stocks, that we know that because there have been more inputs. There have been more inputs of data that have allowed us to
not really, because they assumed. They assumed that these are distinct separate stocks. And then we, for the Great Marlin Race, put tags out and we see a fish swim from Cabo to Hawaii. And we're like, wait a second. You read the assessment says there's no mixing between them. And it's like, so you're managing that separate from this, but they're not really separate. And so that's just one piece that we learned. And it's like, well, where else is it wrong? And there's some of it is just kind of academic level science, to go cut open fish, see what's going on inside. And the real issue is catch. You need catch. It's really the best way to monitor changes in abundance. Abundance being the number of fish out there.
Right.
And so catch is an important thing. Again, these are bycatch species, so catch is hard. But we call it fisheries dependent data. So data that's dependent on fisheries to get.
Gotcha.
What you really want is independent data. So a study that goes out there and estimates this kind of stuff outside of a commercial fishery. And we don't really have that with
And
billfish.
that study would be something, you say a study that goes out and does it. That would be the stuff that, like, IGFA, a group like that would try to fund.
Kind of,
or
it's hard. It's hard with billfish because like you could say I'm going to go do a billfish. We're going to go fish for billfish specifically, or do a hydroacoustic survey. So you're using like scientific level fish finders basically, and say we're going to do that. But it's so expensive and it's so hard, and these fish live in the open ocean. It's just not economically feasible to do. So we're stuck with just the dependent data. And the biggest problem is you think of black marlin, the average person who's out there to catch tuna for the most part, say skipjack, whatever, like they don't necessarily know the difference between a blue and a black marlin. They're similar.
Sure.
There's some, we know the difference because this is what we do, but they don't care. They're not gonna like it's not important to them, unless there's like, and this one's way more expensive and we can sell it at the market for more. Like so you'll get the data is a mess from that. So you'll get unidentified billfish, or you'll get just a blue marlin when you're like, nah, it's probably not a blue marlin, it's probably a black marlin. Vice versa.
Their commercial royal slam.
Yeah, and then you have off the U.S. we have pretty good data. And we have people that collect it. There's observers on boats, all that kind of stuff. There's a lot of the world where they don't have any of that stuff. And so we don't know, how many, go to the Eastern Pacific, you look at Costa Rica, I'm sure, you fished Costa Rica a bunch. I did my graduate student work there, and you can't go more than a few miles without seeing a long line. And then, we would be out there and there'd be Panamanian long lines in Costa Rica illegally. And none of that's getting counted. And so that's just one place. It's like that all over the world, especially in the Pacific Ocean. There's millions and millions of hooks at any given time in the Pacific.
So on that subject, because I want to go back to your your research that you did when you were in school too, but you're talking about like the long lines in Costa Rica and the Pacific. Like that is categorized. That's a type of commercial fishing. Would those that people encounter fishing off Costa Rica, I've seen them, those long line boats, would those be considered artisanal fleets, or would those be like a industrialized commercial fleet?
So it kind of there's both there. So they do have some bigger long line vessels that would be like almost industrial scale. But for the most part, the ones you're seeing are at little pangas and everything. So that's not necessarily subsistence because they're selling it, but it's an artisanal fishery there. Same off the coast of Africa, you get actual subsistence there, but then there's also some artisanal. And nobody's writing that down. Like the markets aren't saying we sold 50 blue marlin today, or we sold however many sailfish today. So it's hard for us to try to find the information necessary. Like we don't have an assessment for sailfish in the Eastern Pacific that is a reliable assessment, because we know that way more of these are getting caught than we can quantify. So the question is, what do we do? Do we say we think it's this much, or do we say the result of this whole complex, series of, equations and analyses are just unreliable, And so the hard thing is to figure out, how do we get it? Do we fly drones over the beach every day of every, where everybody's fishing? That's not necessarily economically an option. But that would help us to answer some of the questions. So, quantifying how many fish are being killed is probably the most important thing we need to do, is to understand, where they're being caught, how many are being caught, in accurate numbers. With the bigger, open ocean, large scale commercial fisheries, we don't know if we're always getting it, and so it depends on which country is doing it, depends on which management agency, but we really would like to see how many fish are caught and released alive, how many fish are caught and released dead. So discards. If we could get an idea of just discards, it would be, one extra piece that we would have, so we would know the encounter rate of these fish. And if that's, probably a better indicator of how many are out there than the actual, the catch logs, especially because of the market situation. Like in the U.S., because of the Billfish Conservation Act, there's no market outside of Hawaii. So, our fleets don't keep them. But other national fleets keep them and sell them at local markets or whatever.
So I want to talk about the Billfish Conservation Act, but for the discards that you were talking about there, do they not report those? Do the commercial fleets not report those just because they don't have to, or is it because of they're only allotted like a certain number, or they get like penalized if there's X number of discards or something like that?
It kind of depends on which ocean and which management group and which country and everything. But I don't think it's something that they
push that
they
hard.
need to do. You know, if you're out there working, you know, those guys are working hard and they're trying to catch tuna and they catch a billfish and they cut the line. Like,
not going to take the time.
Why take the time to write it down, kind of thing. But you know, with it's something that we would try to do in the U.S. just because, you know, we have some of the most forward-thinking fisheries management of anywhere, you know, in the world. You know, it's like the U.S., Australia, some of the groups in Europe, but yeah, you know, there's open ocean Chinese and Japanese vessels. Like, we don't know if we're going to get that information, and if we do, we don't necessarily always know how much we can trust it.
True. Well, so Han, before we forget about this, so the Billfish Conservation Act, I want to talk about this because I'm sure, you know I'm familiar with this, obviously, because I worked here. Maybe a lot of people may not be very familiar with this legislation. And one thing so the Billfish Conservation Act originally, I think, passed in 2012 under Obama, then ratified with some amendments. I know I'm butchering this, but in 2018, under Trump's first term, and it basically prohibited. And correct me on this because the Hawaii thing is where it is now, is like prohibited the importation of billfish into the United States, with the caveat being Hawaii, and you can correct me on that in a second, but I just want to, the thing that always struck me about this is the reason why we're stopping the importation into the U.S. For me, I was always like, who the hell is who's buying marlin? Like, I think I can think of one or two times down here in South Florida where I've seen marlin, striped marlin in a market, and it was probably 10 years ago. And but it's like, who, you never see it. I very rarely have seen it on a menu when I go out to eat. Where is it? That to me, always, that stat that the U.S. was the biggest importer of marlin or billfish, like marlin and sailfish, always blew my mind. So anyways, if you were to talk about that, but also tell me a little bit more about the Billfish Conservation Act, because I know that's a big thing.
So that was a big thing. That was, before you were at IGFA then. Yep. It was before I got here, but it was a long process to effectively make it illegal to sell billfish in the United States, whether imported or caught here.
Yeah, and that was Choate was a big driver behind that.
Major,
right?
Tim was a big driver of that. From the I'm blanking on the name, is take marlin off the menu.
Take marlin off the menu.
And so, that was a big step, because the U.S. has always been one of the biggest importers of all fish. We for the most part, we import most of the fish that we eat. And I was the same way with the market, and I was like, who's selling blue marlin? And then it's funny, I had a family member in Pittsburgh say, we used to eat blue marlin like once a week. And I was like, what, really? And they were like, yeah, our local store had just big steaks of it. And I was like, that's crazy. Like, I never saw that. Living in Pennsylvania, New Jersey, Florida, Connecticut, all over the place, never saw it. Apparently in Pittsburgh, and I have a buddy from Oklahoma who actually recently sent me a video or a picture of a menu that had marlin tacos on it. And it was like, well, that's illegal. So if you ever see anybody selling marlin in the U.S., it's either not outside of Hawaii, but it's either not marlin or it's illegal,
right?
Which is kind of funny. But you still see it somewhere, and people, there's always those kind of people that'll call and be like, "Hey, they're doing something illegal," but for the most part, it's not marlin.
Yeah. So what that did was, the impact wasn't necessarily, I don't think, the U.S. consumer. I guess maybe it was a U.S. consumer driving this, but it created a market for the billfish product that otherwise there was no market. So now, before this act, there was okay, you go out and you kill a billfish. Maybe it was worth, X. Let's just call it, for argument's sake, $50 for a sailfish, $60 for a sailfish in Central America, because people, it was going to go somewhere. Now you remove that market, that sailfish is not worth hardly anything. Let's call it maybe $30 or $20, whatever. Let's just say, for argument's sake, much less than what it was before. So there's no motivation for these artisanal or even maybe small-scale commercial operations to really target these fish.
Yeah.
All right. So that's the whole idea behind it.
There's a lot of complexities to the commercial fishing world. There are quite a few countries, I think Ecuador is probably the best example, that actually subsidizes the fishing. And so those guys can go out there, catch all these fish, kill everything they catch, and come back and sell it and actually make a really good profit because their fuel and that kind of stuff is subsidized. So, the U.S. can get that at a really low cost from there. So like a lot of our swordfish, I don't want to say percentages, but I want to say it's like 80% of our swordfish is coming from there. And not coming from the U.S. fleet that's doing it sustainably, but would have to charge a higher price.
So why is that? So like you said earlier that the U.S. imports most of our seafood, and I know you and I have had this conversation before. And for me, it's kind of like it pisses me off because like I feel like, man, why aren't we eating our own food? But anyways, walk me through the economics of it, right? Because when you do that, it makes sense.
Yeah. So if you can buy a fish for $1 a pound from Ecuador, and why are you going to buy it for $5 a pound from the United States? Right. The average consumer of just fish in general might not be knowledgeable enough to say, oh, well, the U.S. caught fish. And that's changing, Whole Foods and all that with like people listing where your fish is coming from. That is changing. But, for the average person that wants to go feed their family, you're going to see 2 pieces of swordfish and say, well, this one's half the price of this one. I'm going to get the cheaper one. It's the same thing.
Right.
But there's an economic incentive to, keep importing it, which is, our current issue. And then, our commercial fishermen that are, really doing everything the right way. They have to export it out of the United States to other places.
Do you know some of the biggest importers of U.S. seafood by any chance? Like where is our seafood going? Like,
like that, I'm not 100% sure of because I used to be more in tune with the swordfish markets.
I would imagine the seafood from our commercial guys here, the U.S. caught seafood is probably pretty high grade, right? Because the way it's kept and processed and like
significantly higher than most other places because they're caring for it properly.
And just to back up for a second, that was kind of, if I understand correctly, that was the study of like your master's, right? Was looking at commercial fishing. So let's just step back for we talk about your education. So you grew up in Pennsylvania, right?
Yeah.
Grew up in Pennsylvania, went to Yale and you got a bachelor in biomechanical engineering.
So biomedical engineering with an emphasis in biomechanics. So kind of like a mix between the medical side of things and then the mechanical engineering, how things move.
And then, so at the same time, you also played football. What position were you?
I was a center.
You're a center for Yale. So, I mean, God, it makes me feel embarrassed about my time, my 4 years in college. Just listening to that, just
you shouldn't be.
And then, so from there, you moved on, and you you had a career, like kind of a shift, right? So, like you had, you're doing this biomedical engineering, and then all of a sudden, like you just lost interest, or what happened? What made you switch?
The recession.
Okay.
So I was working at a hospital after college. We were doing motion capture on kids with like musculoskeletal issues at a children's hospital. So you do motion capture and how they would walk through a lab and you'd kind of see how they move relative to how like a typical kid should move. Right. And then you'd recommend surgeries and stuff to kind of help them, be more able to walk around normally. And it was a cool job, but then it was a nonprofit hospital. And so 2008 happened with the recession and everything. And so I had a couple years of it being really uncertain, and I wanted to go back to school anyway. And I'm sitting in a dark room all day in a lab, and I'm looking at fishing stuff 90% of my time anyway, because the work didn't take that long.
Right.
And I'm like, I initially wanted to go to school for marine biology. My parents were like, are you going to get a job in that? Like maybe do an engineering. And I was like, okay. So I did the biomechanics stuff. Was really, really interesting. I think what hooked me into that was I had a project where I looked at the movement of the dinosaur in the T-Rex in Jurassic Park, and did like the kinetics or kinematics or whatever of whether or not it moved realistically in the movie. And so like the fun thing was when they made that movie, they tried to make it look realistic, and they're slow as hell. They're not fast. Like the T-Rex couldn't chase that Jeep or whatever. And so I was like, this is fun stuff. I like really liked it. But like still, I always, was a big fisherman from as early as I can remember. Like I always loved fishing, loved the ocean, always kind of had like a natural draw to the ocean.
And, because you grew up in Pennsylvania, but then you also spent a lot of time in the Keys, right? Because
Yeah,
Is
so
that where-
I've kind of lived all over. I was born in California, lived outside of Boston for a while, then moved to Pennsylvania, and we used to have a boat in New Jersey. So
Gotcha.
we had an old 35 Viking. It's like 1979 or something like that.
Nice.
And so we kind of used that as a house. Like we didn't go out. It had gas engines. So it had 454s in it. So we didn't take it out a whole bunch, especially once gas went from like 99 cents to $3. But, we kind of used that as a house, and it was just a cool place to, be at the marina down there, be around the water, go fishing as much as possible, go surfing, all that stuff. So I was always very much drawn to the ocean. And so when the economy went down, I was going back to school. It's like, do I go to, do more engineering and stay in this world? Because, I had a couple things that I wanted to do. Like I always kind of wanted to do the motion capture for the track athletes for like the Olympics. But when the economy was that bad, those jobs weren't available. So I'm like, you know what? I'm going to do what I really want to do. I went back to University of Miami and got that master's. For that master's, it was it's like a professional master's program. So you take a bunch of classes and then you do an internship, which is kind of like your research project. And so for that one, circle hooks weren't new, but they were, this is 15 years ago that I did it. But they were still studying the impacts of circle hooks, and so in like the early 2000s, there was a big closure for longlining of the northeast distant, but they allowed some research to be done on different configurations, I guess, and so I looked at the impact of the implementation of circle hooks relative to the quality of fish that were caught, the tunas and mostly the swordfish. Like they're graded when they're sold at a market. They're graded based on quality. If you've ever seen wicked tuna, you know what I'm talking about. And so were the fish caught on circle hooks a better quality grade than the ones on J hooks? And there's a lot of intricacies. It was kind of just an exploratory analysis. But generally circle hooks are much better because the fish can survive. You can let it go. So for billfish, circle hooks are critical, and it's something we want on all of the commercial longline fisheries. But for quality grade, like it wasn't the study was not necessarily like the most well thought out thing, just because quality grade is as much the relationship between the guy selling it and the guy buying it. You get a better quality grade, you get a better price. And so like there's a lot more that goes into it that you couldn't look at. Nobody told me that till it was too late. But got to learn a ton about, the commercial fisheries in the U.S. And work with people from NOAA and all that stuff. So it was a cool study. And then that was like a 1-year master's, and I took a ton of classes, and it was a really small group because it was the very first for that master's degree program. We were like the first batch. I think it was the first graduate. And so we had classes with just like 2 or 3 people with like these, really well-known professors. And one of them was my statistics professor. And as I was finishing, he was like, hey, I have an opportunity to go do a PhD tagging billfish in Costa Rica and Guatemala. And he's like, would you want to do that? And I was like, that's why I got into this. Like, yes, that's exactly what I want to do. That sounds like the coolest thing ever. And so, I was like, I needed a job, but I was like, I'll stay in school a little bit longer because this is going to be really cool.
So you weren't dead set from the beginning that you were going to go do a doctor?
No,
get your PhD,
like when I graduated from college, I was like, I'm never going back to school again. I was just like, I had enough after 4 years. But then, it made sense. In the fish world, it's really hard to do much without a higher degree, especially to get, these kind of jobs.
Right.
And if you're going to go work for NOAA, like it makes a big difference. It's hard to work with just an undergrad degree in fisheries, but it's doable, but it's a lot more of a challenge. So I was like, let me get the master's, and then is the master's going to be enough? Probably not for the jobs I want to get. Like, let me go back to school. I have the opportunity. They
do something awesome.
They pay you for it. So yeah.
So then you went down to. So tell me about that. So then.
Yeah.
How many years were you down there doing? Were you living there full time?
2011. No, it was more. I would do trips like week long, 2 week long, rarely longer than 2 or 3 weeks. So I did that a bunch of times. We put out a ton of tags. I think we put was like 70 or so, 80 tags on sailfish, and I think like 30 tags on blue marlin over the course of a few years.
And so this is, you are the one that is deploying these tags, correct?
Yeah, so we were usually, there was 3 of it, depends which boat I was on, because I went with some of the lodges let me go with them. But I went on a private boat for a lot of it. That the owner of the boat was kind enough to let pay for the fuel and take us out and everything.
Wow.
So major support. We went. The captain was Donald McGinnis.
Okay.
I don't know if you've met him. That guy's awesome. Like
Yeah.
one of the best guys down there. He would take us out, so we would go and just stay out on the boat for a few days and just tag as many fish as possible. And I think there's all the fads out there. So for the blue marlin, it was easy. We could get a ton. Like I think we caught 8 or 10 in one day, and it was me and the mates. So we're like taking turns catching the fish.
You're fishing.
Yeah, we were fishing.
That's
Yeah,
awesome.
so it was like it was really exhausting at some points because like man, catching 8 blues in a day was a lot. And then it was like you'd hand off the rod, like they'd fight it, I'd tag the fish, and so
Right.
it was a little bit chaotic. And we tried a lot of unique stuff fishing down there, which was kind of fun with like green sticks and stuff. But it was a really cool opportunity and got to see a ton of different billfish, and then we got a lot of really good data back. So we did that for 3 or 4 years, maybe closer to 5 years, I guess, collecting data. It was mostly Costa Rica, but a lot of sailfish in Guatemala. It was kind of before you started seeing so many marlin in Guatemala that you see now. But found some really cool stuff out. Like the first study we did, we had accelerometers on billfish, so on these sailfish. And so the tag would basically look at their activity level. So they're like accelerations, assuming an acceleration is for either feeding or, some other behavior.
Right.
So we like kind of quantified how many of those kind of high acceleration events and like what were the intensities of the accelerations and got kind of a plot of their activity level throughout the day.
Cool.
So we had it for depth before, like at night they don't dive during the day. And this is true for pretty much all billfish, not swordfish are different. So all the marlins and sailfish and spearfish too. At night they don't do much. They don't see well. So they're just kind of cruising right at the surface. They stay relatively calm and just cruise. And then during the day, their activity increased with the illumination of the sun, which I thought was a really cool thing. And so you'd have catch rates as soon as the sun's up, you start seeing them. You start they get more active, and then as the day goes on, they generally were more and more active to a point midday, and then it would go down a little bit. And then there was like usually a little peak towards the end of the day. And like the coolest thing that we found is something I presented at the Billfish Symposium when it was here, was we happened to be there during the full moon and have fish or have tags on fish during the full moon. And, I didn't think about it, but I'm looking at this data and I'm like, why is there this weird little peak at night? Like what's going on here? And then I remembered it was with a well-known photographer, Mark Montocchio. He was down there. We were taking pictures in Guatemala for it. And I remembered asking him, is it, and like, this is just me not knowing, like, if it's a full moon here, is it the full moon for everybody on the planet? And I was just like, a stupid question you ask somebody in a car when you're on your way back. And like, that hit me as I was looking at the data. I was like, it was the full moon.
Right.
Like, and we had tags on fish from like the week before. So I was like, well, let's check that. And then I looked at like the illumination. I found some data set that looked at the illumination of the moon, and it was a perfect match.
Wow.
And it was like, this kind of stuff doesn't happen that often.
Right.
You don't get these cool things where you just kind of randomly come up with something. And it was all of the fish had it. It wasn't just like one or two. It was all the fish that we had tagged. That was like 7 of them. They all had that little bump in activity during the full moon. So like, theoretically, if you wanted to set up stadium lighting out at a canyon or something, you should be able to catch billfish. Whether that's true, no one's tried it, but I think it'd be a fun thing to try.
So so basically it showed during the time when, like during the moon, when full moon was kind of like at its peak, you would see increased activity with the sailfish. Yeah,
and I think it's a light level situation. Like there was so much light from the moon that it tricked them into thinking the sun was rising.
Because you correct me if I'm wrong, but like you'll get billfish on long lines that are set at night, right? Like they'll feed at night or not really? I mean, or is it hard?
I think if they come across something and they'll eat it, but I don't think they see it that well.
Gotcha.
Their vision is really not ideal for dark conditions. Like
Gotcha.
when billfish, are swimming, their eyes face a little bit up. It's like upper four, I think is what it's, so it's forward and up.
Okay.
And so they're kind of designed to hang out at that interface between dark and light. So where, you know, the water above it is light, say maybe like 150 meters, something like that, where where it's dark below, light above. So they're looking up at, you know, small tunas and stuff. And so they can see the silhouettes of those because the light is coming down on them.
Gotcha.
So at night, you know, I think that they just don't really see that well. But I think if it, you know, runs into a fish or something, it's probably going to eat it.
Right.
I could be wrong.
But at full moon, they have enough light. From what you see, it looks like they have enough light to engage and be like, okay, I can feed now.
Yeah, that's at least what we found. It was a cool, unique thing that I don't know if anybody had ever really thought to look at before. It was just kind of an interesting result.
Yeah, so all right, so that's stuff that you got. You tagged, you know, basically doing the satellite tagging, and that studies for your PhD. And then, so now, fast forward, you know, 10 years, 15 years, whatever, you're now leading the IGFA's Great Marlin Race, which is the world's largest citizen science satellite tagging program for billfish, correct? So, I mean, the last I remember, it's 500 plus tags deployed.
We're like almost 675 now, something around there.
Yeah. So, I mean, give me a little bit of background. So it started, I mean, I remember this stuff. I'm very familiar with 2011, I believe, is when the program officially launched.
Yeah.
Right?
So it started with Bob Kurz and Barbara Block, who is our partner. She's at Stanford University. She kind of invented the technology. She's like the biggest person in the satellite tagging world, I think in the early 90s when she was first working on these things. But she and Bob were out at the HIBT tournament in Kona and thought, you know, how do we get more satellite tags out? You know, they thought of the whole concept of get people to sponsor the tags that are going to go fishing for them, get them to put the tags out. And then Barb gets the data.
Right.
So they did that for a couple years. And in 2011, IGFA got involved and took it from what was just in Kona at the HIBT to like a global program. And so now we're up to, and I think it's like 6, 7, it changes like every day.
Right.
This is our busy time of year, so we get a lot of tags out. But I know it's at least 665 tags because I just did a presentation at the American Fisheries Society meeting 2 weeks ago, and it was 665 then. So I think we've got a couple out. We probably maybe 670 at this point, and it's a lot. I mean, you think each one of these devices is $4,000 to $5,000 somewhere in there. Once you factor in setting it up and data analysis and all that kind of stuff, it's way more.
Right.
So it's one of those things where any single lab group would never have been able to do this, but because IGFA came on board and because the billfish community is uniquely capable of supporting this kind of work, that involving them in a citizen science project and involving the science side and then the recreational anglers and having that like race element where the fish that, the tag that pops up the farthest away is going to win the race. Like have all of those combined to be really successful. The community has done, really kind of embraced the program. I think it's one of the more well-known research programs out there in terms of the fishing community. And yeah, it's been, I think we're up to 13 or 14 publications from it now.
Wow.
And we've, we were the first to tag some species. We just came out last year with a group in Italy that this Mediterranean spearfish. There's a big paper that came out, I think it was last year, maybe a year and a half ago. Really, really interesting stuff. The first paper I think that's ever really been written about, a bunch of information from that species, kind of figuring out what's going on with that really understudied species. And so, the program has given back that some of the data was used to talk about the Billfish Conservation Act.
Right.
We were talking about the striped marlin, the different stock structures and how they're managed as separate stocks, and then we put these tags out and they say, wait, they're not separate, they're mixing,
Right.
And we only have a few examples of that, but one example is a sign that maybe this is happening more often. Another good one, so last year, I think Marlin published an article about it. The winning fish was a striped marlin that swam from New Zealand to the Galapagos almost. Like pretty straight in like 6 months, or 6 or 8 months. And it's thousands and thousands of miles in a relatively short time. And, got to thinking, so striped marlin in New Zealand get big, really big. Striped marlin in the Galapagos get pretty darn big. Striped marlin, Mag Bay, not so much.
Right.
You know, you see striped marlin off Central America, but they're not like in all the fishing I did in Costa Rica. I think we only saw one in all the years we were doing that. You see them there, but they're not as common.
Right.
And then you see the ones in Hawaii, not so
as
big
either, right? Yeah.
And so you think, well, if they're big in the Galapagos and big in New Zealand, and you just had this fish swim there, is that a separate stock? True. You know, is it separated by the equator more than it's separated, you know, from east west?
True.
These are the kind of things that, you know, we only have one example, but you know, you start thinking about, you know, and that's where kind of genetics can come into play, and you can do, you know, some other work and try to figure out, you know, exactly how related these are. And Jackson, the conservation manager that works with us now, he actually did his master's work with Jan McDowell and John Graves at VIMS at William and Mary. And his work was specifically on striped marlin. So his paper's coming out any day now. It just got approved from the symposium proceedings. And he talks a lot about, you know, kind of the connectivity of all the different striped marlin. And so,
Very cool.
Yeah, there's a lot of, it's the program, you know, gives us these kind of insights, and you can get the Great Marlin Race program gives you these kind of unique insights into what the heck's going on in a world where we still have so much to learn.
It almost gives you more questions.
Oh yeah.
You know, it's like you see stuff like this and then it's like, well, hold on. You know, like we thought we knew something, and then you got to rethink it.
Yeah,
you know?
yeah, and, you know, and things, you know, things are constantly changing in the ocean. You know, we've learned so much. I think one of the first papers that came out of it was a bunch of fish tagged in Hawaii during El Nino and then La Nina, and then when you have the change and you get colder water and you get upwelled, you know, cold water, and then the dissolved oxygen is lesser, it's closer to the surface. It completely changed the migratory patterns of blue marlin, like completely. Like they used to cross the equator and head down to French Polynesia, and then it switched and they didn't anymore.
Right.
And it's like, well, that clearly had a major impact. And you know, with my my PhD work, so what I did was we used a different kind of tag that was a little more accurate in that particular area, because it used Earth's geomagnetic field to figure out where it was. And so we could look at more smaller scale, like environmental and oceanographic conditions, and that these fish were kind of witnessing. And so the kind of end goal of all the work was to build a model that kind of explored the preference for different environmental conditions from like the abundance of tag data that I had. And so you know, you build a model to effectively predict the likelihood of a billfish being there based on environmental conditions, and got some really unique results. You know, the one being the two most important were divergence, which is kind of the spreading apart of two water masses, upwelling, what you think of, and then vorticity, which is the spinning, which think of eddies, edges of eddies. And anybody that's used ROFs or any of those kind of things, you know, like if you get an edge of an eddy, there's shear, there's like convolution of currents. Anywhere, you know, weed lines, trash lines in the Pacific, or just, you know, logs, stuff like that, you know, the like floating objects. That is an indication to fish that there's an oceanographic thing happening there that's congregating all of this stuff. So there's convergence and divergence. Convergence is where it all pushes together and you get the nice weed lines, and then divergence is when, you know, it's actually upwelling and spreading out where it'll converge on the edges. So like it'll, you know, diverge in the center of an eddy that's spinning and then, you know, converge on the outside. And so kind of looking at all of those things, those were some of the most important, and it's something that the fishermen kind of already knew.
Right.
Like that's one of the reasons people get the ROFs or, you know, any of those kind of ocean forecasting things. Because you can go and you can kind of pinpoint, you know, where based on chlorophyll and sea surface temperature and all that stuff to say, well, we think this is going to be a positive area to fish because of the local conditions. And so my PhD was trying to kind of take what we knew as a community and then say, here's the scientific evidence that that's true.
Gotcha.
And to an extent it did.
Nice. You know, the satellite tagging has been going on, you know, that's been a thing for, let's call it 15 years, right, at this point. We've tagged, at least in this program, or you know, anglers through the IGFA Great Marlin Race have tagged, you know, 600 plus, call it close to 700 billfish. We have this, you know, master, you know, data set that shows where all these things have gone. We've got some incredible tracks that have like broken some of the kind of preconceived notions that we had about these species. What and I know I know this, but I want you to talk about the fish and ships program, or that concept, which is kind of what I understand to be the next step into using the data that we've, obviously we're using the data, put out 13, 14, 15 published papers. It's being used that way. But what kind of is the bigger picture for what you guys are looking at for next with this data from the satellite?
Yeah, so that's something that Dr. Barbara Block is working on. Again, so this program is a partnership between IGFA and Stanford, particularly Dr. Block. And so something that they've done is, as you know, every big boat has an AIS on it these days. And so there is a group called Global Fishing Watch, I think. And what they do is they kind of compile all of the commercial fishing data from the AIS. And so you generally know where the commercial fishing operations are happening for the groups that are participating in this. So for the North Atlantic, we have a really good idea of what's going on. And so what you can do is you can take all of the billfish tracking data that we have, say use blue marlin, and overlay basically everywhere they've gone, or you can look at the tagging data and say, okay, we have so many tags out now. We generally know what the preference for sea surface temperature is, what the preference for XYZ environmental characteristics are. And you can map where that occurs. So you can map habitat suitability across the whole world or anywhere you have enough data.
Right.
And then from there, you can go and see within those areas, where are the hot spots for commercial fishing. And you can do that with the real tracks as well. And so you can effectively get an idea of the vulnerability of these fish to commercial fisheries from that. And so they're calling this program, and it won't just be billfish, it'll be all the different species. And it'll, effectively do that and map out, where are the areas of greatest concern. And so if you were ever going to do any sort of management technique or seasons or, spatial management, you'd have that to say, this is the area we need to focus on because this is where, this species, which is of primary concern. So you say blue marlin's our biggest concern. It's not for management, but for us it is. And you say, well, where on the earth are they being caught the most? Like maybe we shouldn't let people fish there. Right. Commercial fishing, that is, because we're talking open ocean stuff. There's no recreational fisheries for the most part in these places. Right. So it's I think the next step in what we need to do, to be able to actually quantify where these commercial fisheries are operating, and then be able to figure out, when they interact with billfish, because it'll kind of skip over the need to get some of the data from these, that we're probably never going to get, and so you can figure out kind of how you can manage a species without actually getting the data that you need, which is the real encounter rate of all of these.
True. Well, I think that's cool, because I think the satellite tagging program, it's interesting because, you see how far these things go. And you have some incredible tracks like fish, I don't know if this is still the one that's the longest, but there was one that was tagged off Puerto Rico and traveled all the way down to Angola, across the Atlantic.
That's a cool one.
There's another one that I think, there was one tagged off a Lizard Island, black marlin.
Big one, yeah.
And it swam almost to Peru.
I think it swam to
Chile,
Easter Island.
Or Easter Island, something like that. So anyways, it's impressive, but I think it's also very cool for also the people that are doing it to say hey, it's more than just a cool track or whatever. Yeah. It's one, we're learning things about it, and two, it's going, the idea is that this is going to feed into a bigger program that, will do something. So I
think that's what's made this program so successful. Again, I just gave a talk about this and got some feedback from the scientific community. And they agreed, this is a program where you're doing really high level science, in that, the algorithm that Barb runs to actually geolocate these tracks is a state space model that's incredibly complex, but the outputs are so easy to understand. Anybody, a kid, a little kid can go up and see a map and a track and say, that's where the fish swam. Right. It's so easy that it makes our lives a little bit easier. I say this because we do a lot of genetic research too. We have a roosterfish project, golden dorado project. Yeah. We have a bunch of other research that we do that's not billfish, and it's so hard because outputs from genetic analyses, I don't even understand them because I'm not a geneticist. And so it's really hard to like celebrate, hey, look what we found. It's like, I don't know what that means.
Yeah.
Where it's like, well, look what this fish did. And, you know, like that's really interesting. It's fun. Like there's that competitive race element to it, you know, but really, you know, there's a lot more information that we can get than just, you know, that's cool, it went to this place, you know, and like, but it also kind of, the program itself points out how hard it can be to do billfish research. Like the example that I've been using recently is last year, we put 3 tags out on the same day, pretty much at the same time, all on white marlin, same people, same boat, same process. Those 3 fish were experiencing the exact same environmental conditions for the most part when they were caught, tagged, and released. And they went completely different ways, completely different behaviors. One swam up to Newfoundland, one swam down to like Venezuela, and one swam to Colombia from the Dominican Republic. And it's like, how are we supposed to see any patterns?
Yeah.
The only pattern here is that there's no pattern.
Right.
And so, you know, it's one of those things where it's like, well, we need a lot more data.
Right.
And so that's kind of, you know, it's hard. Like billfish are hard. It's a lot harder than a lot of other species, but you know,
And to manage too, right? Because
it.
I mean, it's not like there's. I mean, I don't want to go down that road, but it's like these fish, they're moving across, you know, political boundaries and continent to continent, basically, you know. So it's like they can't be managed in a static location.
Yeah,
because,
we've had fish swim,
highly migratory species
swim from Bermuda to the U.S. East Coast, over to Cape Verde, and then down the whole coast of Africa.
Yeah,
like that. How many different management groups? I mean, it's all ICAT,
right?
How many different management groups, you know, or national boundaries did that thing? Because one of them swam actually really along the coast.
Yeah.
And so it was within the economic zones of all of those countries. And like none of them are managing them the same.
Right.
You know, most of them aren't managing them at all.
Right.
So, you know, it's kind of open season for that fish. It ran a gauntlet of hooks and didn't get caught, you know, but you know, it's a challenge. Yeah, seriously. But yeah, there's I wish I remembered the number, but there's like, you know, tens of millions of hooks in the ocean at any given time on any given day. It's it's so much more than you'd imagine.
Right. Do we have any idea or any solid foundation on where, let's say, blue marlin or different species of billfish spawn?
We have kind of an idea.
Mm-hmm.
You know, blue marlin, not as much. They likely spawn multiple times. You know, striped marlin, we have some idea in the Pacific, but for the most part, no. Like
Right.
we don't have definitive answers to when, where, how many. You know, you can open up a fish that is full of eggs and count how many eggs,
Right.
but you don't know a ton. There are probably people out there that do know a little more than I do, because that's not something I've really focused my research on. But
Right.
I've been working recently with NOAA and Wild Oceans on what they're calling the Kona Project, and it's
Right.
trying to figure out. They're finding little fish. You know, NOAA has run these research cruises for years now, and so you know they had all of these juvenile, you know, larval billfish
Through sampling nets, right?
through
That they're
sampling, yeah,
driving in,
like
the Kona
really
gyre
fine
or whatever?
nets, yeah.
Okay.
So kind of all around Kona,
Gotcha.
and so they had all these jars, and there was no desire to figure out what species of billfish it was or anything, and so Rob Kramer from Wild Oceans came in and said, "What if we pay you to analyze this and then make a spreadsheet that is, you know, where these things were caught, what species it is, as best as they can tell, especially because the old ones are kind of hard to
Right.
figure. I mean, it's a billfish this small, you know, it's kind of hard to get genetics from it. But they did. And so right now we're, you know, working with that group to try to figure out and kind of backtrack. Like if you found a little tiny blue marlin here, you know, let's look at the oceanography and like what a drifter would do and backtrack where that could have come from. Because we know it's only a couple days old. They grow quickly at that age. And so you backtrack and, you know, you have the nice maps with eddies around Kona, and it's like, oh, it might be here. It might be here. So we'll see what that data looks like once the oceanographers are kind of are done doing it. But it's one of the important things that we need to know. Because when you think of the most important kind of management, if you can ensure these things are not getting lit up when they spawn, are not getting, caught at really high levels when they spawn. It's something we focus on a lot in Florida here. We had that Western dry rocks years ago, that it was like 7 or 8 different species were spawning at here over like a 3 or 4 month period. I was like, why don't we close this tiny little area while these fish are spawning? Because like, it's probably not a problem that they're getting caught, but it's a problem that the sharks keep eating them.
True.
And so, like a permit was the driving, the driving factor there, because they're so easy to catch there, and like the sharks were just ripping them apart. And it was like, and all these, economically important snappers or groupers are doing the same. Like if we could do that with billfish, it's not going to be a static, stationary closure, because it's probably going to be relative to some oceanographic condition. But you could say, when these oceanographic conditions occur each year, maybe let's not let people fish there.
Right.
Because like let's make sure they actually can spawn and everything works.
For sure.
Because striped marlin there in Hawaii are in a little bit of bad shape.
But it's safe to say, though, that finding and identifying where those spawning locations are, regardless if we could find, that would be a big step.
Big step. Yeah, it's something we're actively working on right now.
Gotcha.
And I think, the one we brought up genetics a few times. Genetics are going to be the way of the future, because there are some things we're just never going to get. And we're getting so good at some of these genetic analysis. You may have heard about the close kin analyses they do now. It's something that they started, Walt up at University of Maine, has started on bluefin. And Viking has been advertising it recently.
Okay, the program they're doing, they're calling it Get Citizen Science for
so
sampling.
you get fin clips basically, or just genetic samples, and you get enough of them, and you can see how related everything is, and basically the more distant relationships, and I could be totally botching this, but the more distant relationships basically mean the more fish are out there.
Gotcha.
So you can figure out kind of.
You're not inbreeding, right? So you have more diversity, correct?
Exactly.
Okay.
Exactly.
Gotcha.
So the more genetic diversity, the more fish should be in the ocean.
Right.
So you can actually get estimates of population health from a really well done close kin study. That's all relatively new. I'm just kind of learning about this recently. It was mentioned a little bit at the billfish symposium, but not as much as kind of we thought it was going to be.
Yeah.
But it does seem like some of the new genetic techniques and the new analyses are really the way of the future.
Yeah, I think during those genetic talks, that's when some of the times I fogged out during the symposium.
Again, it's not my specialty, and it is a little bit above, because like I remember, they did genetics in basic biology. You have to take a biology class in college. And I think I was traveling for a football game, and they did it all in 1 week, and I missed it. So I only got it in high school, and so the genetic stuff to me is still a little bit hard to understand, but it's really interesting, and I do think, like, luckily we have Jackson on our team now, so he's the genetics guy. I don't have to know as much.
Gotcha. All right, so another question. This is kind of weird. This is something that I have in my head as someone that I don't hunt as much as I like, but I hunt. But so I've had this conversation with guys that I, friends with that hunt, and they're like, and the question is this: do billfish, or from what we've seen from satellite tagging, do they migrate? Is it considered a migration, or is that a proper term for it? Because I feel like a migrate. I think of something like wildebeest, or something that like every year from like a certain period of time, it like clockwork, or a salmon, like exactly they return to the same river or whatever where they were, born every year to spawn or whatever. But like, is it that? Because to me, like you said with the white marlin was a perfect example. You have 3 fish tagged exact same spot, and they went 3 different locations. To me, it's like, I don't consider that do they migrate? Are they like a purpose-driven movement, like almost guaranteed, but I don't know.
It's tough because you have seasonality of billfish catches.
Right.
Like Bermuda doesn't have that population that they have in July for the rest of the year.
True.
So I think there is kind of a movement that is relative to seasons, environmental conditions, all that stuff. And we have seen, we had a white marlin that was tagged in the Bahamas either last year or the year before. And it followed the tournament circuit up. So it left, skips tournaments. in the Bahamas. Then it went up to Big Rock, and then it went up to the White Marlin Open, and the Mid-Atlantic, and then it came back to the Bahamas. It's one of the only fish I've ever seen actually make a circle.
Another chosen one.
Yeah, seriously. Like it was cool because it was I think it was a pretty big one too. So like it would have got kept at maybe not Big Rock, but the other billfish tournaments, like it would have been worth a couple $1,000,000.
Especially with that tag in it too. That's a couple extra.
Hey, $500. Anybody ever finds a tag, don't throw it out. We'll give you 500, 250 or $500. Either way, you're going to get some money for it. Because if you get a tag back, you get a ton more data. You get, instead of every few minutes or every few hours to minutes, you get every few seconds. You get a ton of data. But yeah, so we have Bermuda's a really good example because we have a lot of data from Bermuda, and they do follow more of a pattern there than they do in other places. A little bit and I'll talk about that in a second, in California, but we see a lot of them crossing the Atlantic. Not all of them, but a lot of them will head east and go near the coast of Africa, and then some kind of look like they start coming back. Where they'll start, and the problem is the technology is not where we need it to be yet.
You need the year long.
You need at least a year, and it's so hard to keep a tag in for a year.
What the tags are at, like 8 or 9 months?
It's
240 days.
Typically we do 180 days, 6 months, or 240 days, which is about 8 months.
Okay.
And so you can see that kind of path of they swim from Bermuda. They usually go north or kind of northwest first, and then work their way. And we've had one go right through. It looks like right through the middle of Cape Verde. And then all the way down the coast of Africa till it gets to the equator. Excuse me, and then it starts heading west, back towards where it was caught. So, does it come back to Bermuda? It's certainly possible, but we haven't seen that happen. One thing that we do almost always see is the striped marlin that are caught in Southern California don't go anywhere but south. So I think they come. We've never had one tagged to go up to Southern California, but we've tagged a few in Southern California, and they always go down to Mexico.
They're not going to Hawaii.
Not typically, but they do.
Okay.
They can, but they typically go north first.
Gotcha.
And they'll spend some time along that coast because that season starts a little bit before Mag Bay. It's right about now, and so they're catching them right now, and those fish will kind of migrate with some of the fishermen down towards Cabo, and then either stay in that area. Sometimes they go all the way up into the Sea of Cortez, and then the tag pops off there. Sometimes they'll go a little bit west, or they'll just hang out in the area. And then we've had a few actually go all the way to Hawaii and then start coming back like they were coming back to Southern California.
Interesting.
And we had a striped marlin in Hawaii that ended up going, I think it was within 500 miles of like the Aleutian Islands in Alaska. Went way north.
Golly.
And so to try to figure out, how these fish are determined, because this is not a smart animal.
Right.
This is something that it doesn't know it's too cold that way. It doesn't know any of that. All it knows is what it's experiencing. And I don't think it has that kind of navigation ability like a salmon does.
Right.
Where there's like some sort of basically a compass built into it. Like I don't think they have that.
Right.
And so I think they're just, experiencing what's around them and going towards what's a favorable condition, which is that was kind of what my graduate work was like, trying to figure out what are those things in the ocean that make a fish stay going straight, slow down, speed up, or make a turn.
True.
And so what different condition, whether think of an eddy, there's an eddy spinning out in the ocean and it has a whole nice, beautiful weed line along the edge of it. Did that weed line make it stop and spend time there? Did it make it slow down? Did it make it speed up, or did it make it turn and go the other way? And we found there's an oceanographic feature off between Costa Rica and Nicaragua called the Costa Rican Dome. You get winds that blow in between the mountains across Central America, and you get really strong upwelling in this one area. It's like the Papagayo wind jet, I think it's called. And so you'll get really cold water that's being upwelled. There's almost no oxygen at depth. And it's a really important place because all the whales go and give birth there because it's like a safe place for them. And billfish hate it. Billfish do not want to go in it. And so you'll see a billfish swim along. We've seen this with sailfish especially, swimming along. They'll run into the edge of it and they will, they go like this as they're swimming around, and they hit it and it's just a straight line across until they get to the other side, or they'll stop because the edges are productive areas. and they'll go along the edge and go around it. But you never see them spending time inside of it.
And they're in there like, let's get at it.
And so I think they're just kind of going about their lives, and they find themselves in different places.
Right.
But you would still think that fish experiencing the exact same thing would have a genetic innate response to it. Yeah, some instinct to do the same thing altogether, and they don't, which is really frustrating for sometimes. But it's still interesting to see.
Yeah, absolutely. All right. So the other question, and again, clear this up for us: is there such thing as a hatchet marlin? And
no,
there's not. It's
there's
a spearfish.
not.
It's a round scale spearfish, right?
There's white marlin and there's round scale spearfish. They're so similar. They're managed as one group. Because there's some like very, very small differences. And I think people saw that small difference from a white marlin and be like, this is something different. We're going to call it a hatchet marlin, but it's a round scale spearfish.
And so we're just going to run through the known like different species of billfish. Just right here. Atlantic and Pacific blue marlin, same species.
Yep.
Correct. Black marlin, its own species. Atlantic and Pacific sailfish, same species.
Yep.
I'm going to come back to that one second. White marlin. I don't know if I said that already. Striped marlin.
Yep.
Then the spearfish. You have short-bill spearfish. That's the only one in the Indo-Pacific, correct?
Yes.
Short-bill, right? And then you have long in the Atlantic and Med or whatever. So you got Atlantic, the long-billed spear, the round-scale spear, and now the Mediterranean spearfish, correct? And what I wanted to come back to was the sailfish, right? So the sailfish is another kind of hot question I want you to elaborate on, is the vertical habitat compression and how that, I'm, growing up fishing here in Florida, caught a bunch of sailfish, until I finally went to Costa Rica. First sailfish I caught, I was like, oh my God, I caught him. It's a blue marlin, because it's so much bigger. I was like, 100-pound plus sailfish. And I was like, holy cow, it's huge. Even though knowing that when I first saw it, it was like, first reaction was like, that's not a sailfish. So anyways, it's the same species. Talk to me about why in the Pacific versus let's say here in Florida, the sailfish are significantly larger.
Yeah, so they were thought to be different species for a really long time. So there was a separate species name and everything. And then I don't know when it was in the last 20 years. They did the genetics on it, and they were like, these are basically the same thing. There's just one is bigger.
Right.
And so in general, upwelling systems, so you have the Eastern Atlantic and the Eastern Pacific. They're productive. You get a lot of bait. You have a really solid food chain, and it's the opportunity for the fish to get really big. You mentioned habitat compression, so I'm going to give you way more detail than you're ever going to want. Oxygen in general sinks in the North Atlantic, and then through bottom currents travels around the world. And so when you upwell water in these, the earth turns this way. And so it's upwelling water on the eastern sides of the oceans. When it upwells water, it's bringing some of that oxygen to the surface, but there's a lot of oxygen there's a lot of water that is not well oxygenated. And so, other than on the very bottom of the ocean, like in between the surface where most of the fish live and then that very bottom water, there's really not much oxygen. And so it's bringing, that upwelling is bringing that up to the surface. And as, things change and the climate changes and everything over, many, many, many years, there's less oxygen available. And so you have what Eric Prince and Nelson Earhart, my old advisor, back in 2006, they both published papers right around the same time on this issue. And in the Eastern Atlantic, and it's growing. It's been growing for a while, and it's getting to the point when we went to Guatemala. I did a consulting thing with the Nature Conservancy and World Bank and UNDP and a bunch of different groups to do an assessment of Guatemala, of like all the fish they have there and the oceanography, all that stuff. So we went and we actually dropped probes down to see how much oxygen. And once you got down to like 50 meters, there's very little oxygen.
50? 50? Yeah, 50 meters.
Yeah, okay. So like 150-something feet. That's shallower than the really ideal hunting depth for billfish. So, you know, everything that needs oxygen to survive, not including the whales and dolphins and stuff, because they can take it from the surface. You know, they're stuck in that upper 50 meters in that area, which is obviously, you know, it's both a benefit and a problem. It's a benefit because every billfish in Guatemala is going to see your baits as you're trolling them across the surface.
Right.
But it also makes them available to all the other fishing, you know, so a purse seine net goes way deeper than 50 meters. So you could wrap up an entire school and get everything, you know, because nothing can swim below it. The only things that go below are obviously the mammals, squids, some of the squids, jellyfish.
Okay.
And there's a little red crab. I think there's a commercial fishery for it, but we put a camera on the probe, and there was just millions of this red crab just hanging out down there, which we didn't expect. So as those are growing, habitat compression, which is the limitation of the fish to dive down deep, you know, is becoming more of an issue that we're seeing. And it changes relative to El Nino, all that stuff, because the amount of upwelling changes and everything. But, you know, for the most part, that's a hot topic in the billfish world, just because there's, you know, there are implications to all of these fish being stuck at the surface. You know, number one, that they're a lot more vulnerable to fisheries. That's, you know, the most concerning element to it. And, you know, the thought is that this is probably going to get worse. And it's worse in the Pacific than the Atlantic, I think, because, like I mentioned, the waters, the oxygen sinking mostly in the North Atlantic. And by the time it gets to the Pacific, it's used. You know, it's mostly used up. And then you have these upwelling systems where you have all of the plankton as it blooms and then sinks and dies, uses up oxygen too. So it's even more, you know, there's just a lot of dynamics going into it. But yeah, for the most part, it's a positive thing for us as anglers. But, you know, there are certainly concerns for what's going on. So there's not much we can do about it.
Right. So basically, though, if I understand it right, so let's just say in the Pacific, Costa Rica, Guatemala, where you get bigger sailfish, you know, that 50 meters is where they're hunting. They're living in that top 50 meters of water, and that's where they're getting their food. That's where they're doing anything. In the Atlantic, it's not 50 meters. It's
probably a little bit deeper. I haven't actually done the sampling in the Atlantic, but
the fish are, in theory, the fish in areas, you know, where they're not compressed are therefore, you know, they're having to work harder, spend more energy to find and hunt food because it's in a bigger area.
Not necessarily, because you know, a billfish is designed, and I forget if we said it before this or if it was during the conversation. They're designed to live at the interface of light and dark.
Right.
And so about 150 meters for blue marlin at least. Like, this is based on some work that was done in Australia on like their retina and how their eyes work. And that they're designed to kind of look, you know, up and forward. And so ideally that's deeper than 50 meters. So like 150 meters. And so whenever you give them that space, so like the study that we did, it was all of our tag data from my grad student stuff, and then I got one of IGFA's tags when I was before I worked here, and I looked. It was off Panama, and in Panama, there's a little area near Tropic Star where it's not compressed. So you can look at how those fish act compared to the compressed fish, and they go way deeper, and they spend more time at depth. And they still do that kind of bounce diving where they go up to the surface, down to depth, up to the surface, and you assume that's for feeding. Whereas the ones in Guatemala and Costa Rica couldn't do that. You know, so they are going down a little bit, but they're going down where they can, whether it be 50, 80, 100, you know, depending on how deep that oxygen is. But that's a hard limit for them. Because we looked at the depth of the minimum dissolved oxygen. You know, there's a lot of different theories on what the limit is for fish to survive. But we found that, you know, it was somewhere between 50 and 100 across most of Central America. This is, you know, 10 plus years ago now.
Gotcha.
But in Panama, I want to say it was like 300 or something.
Interesting.
And so that fish went that much deeper. And so we actually found from that just one example, like that if they're given the habitat, they'll use it. And you see, you look at the omnis and stuff when you're here, you'll see them down super deep,
Right.
which you won't off. I don't know about Cape Verde, but off the coast of Africa, especially, and then off the coast of Costa Rica in general, I don't think you're going to see them at 300,
True.
down, but maybe you do on a good day. And again, that's a combination of a lot of different oceanographic things and how bad the compression is. And it does seem like it's not uniform across the whole area. Guatemala seems to be a little bit worse, which I think is why you get such great sailfish catch rates, because sailfish are a little more coastal compared to, the blues and the stripes and blacks and everything. So you get, those in that it's the San Jose Canyon there. You get just all around that canyon, just incredible sailfish catch rates. And I think that's because they're all right at the surface.
Gotcha. Interesting. All right. Another question, hot topic of recent years, Southern California. They're experiencing, has a lot of history in Southern California for sport fishing. A lot of, where a lot of tackle and innovations came out of, and was a, hotspot for many years. But they've had a resurgence lately, especially with the Pacific bluefin tuna. Tell me a little bit about that, right? So, I've heard things. Obviously, I've been out there. I've fished for them. It's a great fishery.
Yeah.
More tuna, I can say, more tuna on the surface than I've ever seen anywhere else in my life. Just looking out on the boat and just see a ton of them. And so, tell me about that. I hear, obviously I think that the anglers out there are super excited about it. They're happy to have them. I would understandably so. But then on the same side, you kind of hear this conflicting thing that tuna aren't doing well. So tell me a little bit about those dynamics and what's going on there.
So Pacific bluefin are coming back. Pacific bluefin is a really good story of management and kind of the rebounding of that population. They are coming back. They are still at a fraction of where they would be if fishing never occurred. They call that virgin biomass. They're still at a very small percentage of that. So, we're seeing a lot more of them because we're getting closer to a healthy population. I think the Japanese fleet and, some of the other fleets are catching the small ones. So it's a unique fishery because they cross the ocean as they get bigger. And, they get caught across pretty much the entire range. And so you'll have big fisheries that catch little juvenile fish, which is not great. Because you want to give a fish a chance to replace itself. Otherwise you're going to, the stock's going to decline.
Right.
And so you're getting, many, many, many years of big industrial fisheries catching these things and just effectively wiped it out. And so, even something as small as a fishery across the ocean can impact what happens on the other side if those fish make those big, long migrations. And so with Pacific bluefin, we're starting to see the management work. There's a whole plan that there's a joint working group between the Western Central Pacific Fishery Management Council and then the IATTC is the Inter-American Tropical Tuna Commission. I think.
Nice.
I think.
It sounds right.
It's IATTC is all that really matters. But they are jointly managing this because they're across the whole thing. And so there've been a lot of measures in place and it's working. And so we're seeing these come back and, there are concerns because it's a valuable fish. It's not like a billfish. It tastes great. It's something that people are like, if you catch a bluefin tuna, you want to keep the bluefin tuna.
Right.
And that's true of all bluefin everywhere. And so, that's obviously there isn't that conservation ethic where, you'll get kind of ridiculed if you don't throw it back.
Right.
The recreational fleet has no impact on the stock of bluefin or really, billfish for that matter either. But, there's major fisheries for them. And I think that, the management has been successful. They've come back to an extent where we're seeing them. And there's the California guys are seeing some great catch rates, really nice fish. And, that's economically really important to Southern California. It's something we've been looking at. ASA is doing a study right now on the economic impact of that fishery that we can bring to managers and say, look how important this is for just Southern California alone,
Right.
and like make sure there's enough that this can be maintained. Because as soon as they started coming back, the first thought from most of the countries that participate in this the IATTC and WCPFC was, let's up the quotas because there's more of them out there now. We can catch more,
Right.
and it's like, well, why don't we wait for them to be, at a higher percentage of that spawning of that virgin biomass? Because if they're at 10, 15% of the virgin biomass, like, why don't we let it get to be a little bit more, like just
Before we
because
start
it's
drawing on that.
exactly. And so they did it big, and like, there's a lot of jargon that I'll try not to throw out here, but it's a management strategy evaluation. And so basically they will forecast what will happen with that stock based on different levels of exploitation. And say, okay, we're going to manage this stock to get to 15% virgin biomass. We're going to manage it 20%, 25, 30, 35, up to 40.
Gotcha.
And so the recreational...
How strict are you going to be?
Right,
to get here?
right. How much, and how is that going to look, relative to the allocation? Because this is a group tasked with telling the U.S. this is how many your fleet can catch, Japan this is how many your fleet can catch, China this is how many, Taiwan, so on and so forth. And part of that too is also the allocation, like 70% west side of the Pacific, 30% east, 80-20, whatever it may be. And so as I'm on the advisory committee for that group. We just had the meeting a month ago or so, and it's trying to figure out kind of what's that happy medium. What's that? As a recreational community, we want to go for the 40%, which is the most, which is still kind of crazy to me that the most we're willing to let it go is 40% of what it should be.
Right.
But that's kind of, and so we're saying do the 40%. All the other groups, like the Japanese group is going to come in and say, well, we want to catch a whole bunch of these small ones. So we want, 15 or 20, and that's way better than what we had. So it's still positive.
Right.
And so you got to, you kind of come in the middle. But, as IGFA is an organization, the Center for Sport Fishing Policy and the recreational community is really pushing for the harvest control rules that will maximize abundance. Because the more fish are out there, the better the recreational fishery is going to be.
Gotcha. Well, cool. Well, so it's good news for California anglers for now.
Yeah. No, very, very good news. And I do think it'll keep coming back. The fact that there is there are people that are on it,
Gotcha.
that it is getting attention. And I think the fact that we're seeing these fish come back, people are noticing. Whenever you have a success story like that, swordfish here, I think is a good example. People take notice of that. And I think, you start seeing the benefits, especially economically. If you can go say, hey, look how many millions of dollars this fishery is generating for Southern California now, or it's San Diego alone.
Right.
And you say, you go to your governor or senator or whatever, and you say, look how important this is. Like, let's do everything we can to make sure this keeps happening.
It seems like that's another thing from the symposium, and one kind of common denominator that I've taken away from all these years of listening to you and others talk on the conservation side of this and the issues is that one of the biggest things that we can do as recreational anglers, as groups, is to present the evidence through socioeconomic studies or other things that show how important and how valuable a well-managed billfish population or billfish stock in a certain location is, and how lucrative it can be to a certain area. Especially, I feel like, in developed countries, but, developed countries where they, some of this artisanal or subsistence fishing. But I also realized there too, though, it's there's also the sensitivity too, because, you don't want to be, and I feel very strongly about this. I may have my beliefs about whether, you kill a billfish or not or whatever, but dude, I'm not going to go into some place and some guy that's trying to feed his family, whether it's by selling this fish or by, just eating the protein from this fish and be like, no, you can't do that. No way, but But what I'm trying to say is like if we could go in and set up programs or basically work with the right people to show, hey, and it's been done. Like a sailfish, we were talking about before he came on the podcast. Sailfish, in the market is $60. A sailfish, 1,000 plus. If it's depending on how you're targeting it recreationally.
Yeah, and that's
so it's
to reference what you were saying, it was something my lab group at University of Miami did before I got there. I think they looked at the markets for sailfish, and then they looked at the value generated by that sailfish being caught on conventional tackle and then on fly tackle. Mm-hmm. And so in the market, it was $60. This is, I think, 2008 around then, so it's been a little while. It was $60, and then I think it was $800 or $900 on conventional value generated from that fish, and I think it was like either $1,400 or $1,600 on fly.
Wow.
And that's assuming it's only caught once. These fish are probably capable of being caught multiple times, so it's that much more. And you can and I think the developing world a lot of times doesn't realize how valuable those
right.
fish are, because they think of just the fish as something to eat. And they don't, in the U.S. we have very sophisticated recreational fisheries.
Right.
In Costa Rica now you do,
right.
there, Guatemala you do too, but it's on a much smaller scale. But, you talk to representatives, presidents, whatever, in some of those countries, and you say, hey, you have a place down here that people are going to travel from all over the world to go and spend a bunch of money in your country to go catch these things. And it's like, would you rather have them available in the market that draws nobody, that are just going to be caught locally? They're sailfish for Easter. That was what they were all being caught for. They're dried out and sold because I think cod's hard to come by. It was like bacalao, basically, something a lot like that. That dried sailfish was the food, and it's worth nothing. I mean, it's really worth almost nothing. So, say you could sell it here. That fish is gone. It's out of there. No one's going to be able to catch it. Or you could get people coming from all over the world, spending thousands of dollars to come to these lodges, to go fishing, and generate, all this, and go do their tourist trips, like in Guatemala, go to Antigua, and what is the Mayan Tulum or something like that, or whatever the Mayan ruin is. I forget the name of it right now. And they're all going to do that. Costa Rica is the same. Costa Rica has so much to go see. You go see the rainforest. You go do that. And you're going there to fish. Yeah. And so, I think when you have those numbers to show and look how much, and I don't know if it was TBF or somebody else years ago did an assessment of the value of recreational fishing in Costa Rica. And it was an unbelievable amount of money. And so, you can go there and talk to the government and say, look how valuable this is. This is something I think you guys should support. Right. And in supporting it, one thing, and Guatemala did it, which was, let's shut down the market, make it illegal to keep sailfish and sell it. And they did it for a while. I don't know if they're still doing it, but, it worked. The government took notice. It's harder in some other places, but, for us, in general, economics is the best way to get people to take notice. Just because this is a fish, billfish in general are a fish that people spend a lot of money to go after. And, that's something that I think is the utmost important thing for a politician. You know what I mean? How much money is being generated, the economy, all of that. So, that is, it's the easiest way to go and say, this is why you should do this. Yeah.
Money talks kind of thing,
want it because we want more fish out there. Right. The higher your catch rates, the more people are going to come, so on and so forth. So.
Yeah, no, I believe in that. I think that's, from everything I've heard, that seems to be the way. And it's just organizing and getting more of those together. Just like you said, data deficient. If you had a whole pool of socioeconomic studies to bank on, you'd be hey, I mean, we have a few case studies that, from my understanding, but if you had several of these that really drive these people, it would be important. But it's also like we were talking about, it's the people you're talking to have to have that foresight and looking at the the long term rather than a short term kind of benefit that they could reap from the harvest, unsustainable harvest. But
and we were doing it where it was easy because there's not that much recreational fishing. In Guatemala it's easy. There's one marina really. I mean, there's a few other boats, but for the most part, it's all happening in one place. So it's easy to quantify what's going on there because you can count it. It's a lot harder in other places where there's, you know, a more robust fleet spread out over many areas, and you have, you know, guys going out on their own versus, you know, official charter boats and lodges and all that. So, you know, it's like Panama is really easy. It's really just Tropic Star, and there's a couple other, you know, smaller lodges, but you know, we had a bunch of papers that were you know, studies that were presented at the symposium by my old advisor that were just specific to Tropic Star with a RAP, which is their kind of Panama's kind of NOAA, and you know, looking at kind of just the catch rates from this one place, because that can give you just an idea of the whole country, because they're the only ones sampling it,
right?
Which is kind of unique, but yeah, it's still a challenge. Like to do it in the U.S.
Yeah.
I mean, you hear how challenging it is just to estimate how many fish are being caught.
Right.
It's so hard. I can go out in the Keys and no one ever knows I went out. You know, like like nobody's counting it. And I mean, I'd fill out a form if you told me I had to, but I don't have to do anything.
Right.
I'm, you know, fish by all the rules, but like it's so hard to count those people, and all of my neighbors are fishing. Everybody on all of Cudjoe Key are fishing.
Right.
And so it's a really big challenge for us in the U.S. to try to manage our fisheries that way, because there's just so many people doing it.
Right. Well, speaking of that, and like recreational anglers and managing fisheries, so we're gonna wrap up here, but just like some closing thoughts for people. And I know there's a bunch of things that go, you know, you see on the internet, you know, and online about how to handle fish, whether it's, you know, keep them wet or whatever, like all that kind of stuff. But as an angler, as someone that's tagged a bunch of these fish, who's studied these fish and who knows their biology and everything, what would you recommend if there's some simple things? Obviously, you know, if someone wants to hang a fish, they're going to hang a fish.
Yeah.
You know, I'm talking about you were going to release a fish. What are some simple things you could do so that that fish is released in the best spot? I think that's really something that I think people should, and I don't say people, but like, you know, I think more time should be taken on the release and care of fish to ensure that they are released healthy, you know, and people should look at a crappy or an unethical release, in my opinion, as similar to like just stroking a fish, because, you know, like it could have similar effects. So like, anyways, I don't want to harp on that. What I want to say is, what are some cool things or some simple, basic things that the angler or a team could do just to, you know, while they're catching fish?
I think number one is reviving the fish. Mm-hmm. If the fish is not looking good, a lot of people will just assume it's going to die. But we've learned, and this is a story that Jason tells all the time, back in, I think it was 2011, when they were tagging that fish in Puerto Rico that you mentioned. They all thought that fish was going to die, and he went to the sponsor and said, hey, if we revive it, do you still want to tag it and see what happens? Right. And he said, yeah, let's do it. And so they revived the fish for a long time, and like that color will start coming back. It'll start moving its mouth, kind of biting down, and they did, and it survived, and it swam to Africa from Puerto Rico.
That was the one.
That was the one. Okay. So, you know, it's something that I think that's probably, like, if you see a fish that looks like it's worn out, revive it. Spend some time, just swim it along the side of the boat with a boat and gear. You know, give it some time. You'll see it come back to life. That does actually work really well. I think, you know, if you're fishing a tournament, generally you're trying to catch that fish as fast as possible and get it off the line. Right. Like, cut it as close to the hook. You know, ideally, if you're fishing for fun, like, try to get the hook out. Right. It doesn't really make too much of a difference, especially using circle hooks. They usually get caught in the mouth, and if you got a big expensive lure, you're going to want that lure back. Right. Or a stay stuck hook. Those aren't cheap. Right. You know, but if you're going to cut it, you know, try to cut it as close as possible to the hook. But really, the reviving the fish, I think, is the number one thing. You know, there are
a quick fight, like you said, in tournament. Like, don't drag it on if you don't have.
Well, I mean, we're in the wrong room to be talking about this. But
use appropriate size tackle.
But I kind of like, you know, if you fight a fish for 6 hours, the likelihood of that fish surviving is not high. Right. But you know, billfish are pretty. They're not that fragile. You know, like the big thing, and it's actually illegal to do in the United States anyway, but like, don't take it out of the water. Right. Like, I know people want to take a picture. and all
lean
that.
over and
But it's
that type of-
HMS rule. Unless you're going to kill it, if you take it out of the water, it's actually illegal. And so you'll see pictures all the time on social media and stuff of a charter boat holding up a sailfish in the back, and there will always be a couple people commenting like, "I hope you killed that fish," you know. But yeah, so like, don't take it out of the water, and if you're going to take a picture, just lean over the side and take a picture with the fish in the water. Another thing that you see a lot of people do is they pull the head out of the water while they're reviving it, and it's like their gills are up there. Like, you want to leave the gills in the water so they can breathe. Not breathe, but you know what I mean. And I, reviving it, not stressing it out too much. When you come up and the fish is just all dark and it's like, almost going belly up, give it a shot. Try to revive it at least. But again, like, for the most part, I think the billfish fishing community has a pretty good conservation ethic where they're not out there trying to kill billfish. Because you want to be able to go back and catch it again. And so, so like, shorter the fight, probably the better. Of course, it gets a little dangerous. You're going to bring in a green fish, but if you don't have to kill it, don't. If you don't want, if there's not an incentive to, I have no issue with the tournaments that kill fish.
What is it capped at, like $250 a year?
It's $250 a year
US?
in the Atlantic and the Gulf. That's an ICAT mandated amount. That's been studied. That's an allocation that we get.
Is that blue marlin or all marlin? Or
blue and white?
Blue and white.
Yeah.
Okay.
And so, it would count. Spearfish round scale would count for that too. But it's not swordfish, or that's a separate quota. But I think one year we hit it or got close to it, but for the most part we don't get close. I'm not saying to go out there and kill a bunch of billfish. But that number is given to us based on assessments, based on science, and they said that's a reasonable number for our country to kill these fish. But like, truthfully, I've eaten it. It doesn't taste that good. You got to do something special to it, like smoke it or something to make it kind of taste good. So in general, like, I wouldn't I'm not going to go out there and kill one, but I understand and just follow the legal limits. There's regulations on everything. You got to get an HMS permit. So you pay for the permit. It's like $20. It's not expensive. I get it every year for my boat, just in case you come across something that you want to get, especially with the tunas. If you're in a tournament, you're going to win money. I have no issue with that. That's fine. I think the tournaments are they're all linked. It's a registry that they sign up for through NOAA. That every fish that's caught in that tournament is counted. And so, management is well aware of what's going on. They usually participate in some of the tournaments.
Data capture. I mean, I feel like the tournaments are usually very receptive to any sort of like scientific research.
Like you go to Big Rock, you got NC State is there, looking at everything. They're doing diet studies on every fish that's caught. Like, I've stood with those, with that group for a couple years over the last, 5 or 6 years that I've been here, and like looking at what comes out of mahi stomachs and stuff. Like, that's useful information. So, I don't have an issue with there are a lot of people that say we shouldn't kill any billfish. We kill as many billfish in a whole year as a recreational fishing community as probably one boat does in a commercial fishery. One long line boat in the open ocean. Like, we're not having the kind of, and these are numbers that are just pulled out of nowhere. Like, I don't know if that's actually true, but a commercial fishery catches a lot of these. The long line fisheries, and even like there have been purse seines that one set, they just caught like tons and tons of sailfish. And so, it's not it's in Central America, especially, like, if anyone that has gone down and driven down a long line, one of the artisanal long lines there, it is sailfish, sea turtle, sailfish, sailfish, one tuna, sailfish, and so it's all. It was like I think the number is like 60-something% bycatch in those fisheries, and so almost all those fish are going to die. They're not going to survive long on that, and most of the turtles are going to die too, unfortunately, and that's an endangered species. But the number of fish being killed by these mostly not well managed long lines. Are so much more than anything the recreational fishery. Like, the recreational fishery is a period on a page, a full page compared to, the actual numbers of commercial fish being caught commercially.
Well, I say it's good to hear, but but it's also, concerning to hear too, because you think about that and it's like the way you put it in perspective is like, what we do in a year is like what one boat could possibly do. And it's like, damn, and it's like, again, not like you're saying, all right, let's go out and stroke every fish that you get.
Sure.
But, again, my thought process, we were talking on the last podcast with Ray Rocher, and it's like, if you're doing it legally, wherever you're fishing, and, I think it's a personal choice. You make your own decision. It's up to you, And if
I've got no
you're doing
problem
it right
with it.
and you're doing it by the law, and that law is governed by sound logic for like the management of that species, and it makes sense.
Yeah. I certainly wouldn't promote it,
Right.
wouldn't promote like we want to, kill billfish, but we're given 250,
Yeah.
and we can use 250, and that's a number that they came to based on a lot of science and a lot of research.
I think you used the right word there too. Is it's use. You can use because it's you're talking about a resource, right? Like you can use 250 recreationally, and I could make a pretty strong argument that goes to a lot of good that comes out of. Not even. We're not going to get down this topic, but like about all the tournaments that do harvest fish and weigh them. It's got to be tens of millions of dollars in charity donations and things
All
like
that
that
kind
come
of
out
stuff.
of big rock. All that. It's wild. But anyways,
Yeah, again, like I don't want to make it seem like I'm saying we should hit that 250 every
for
year.
sure, I hear you.
I think the less we kill, the better.
Right.
Obviously, but for the most part, we're killing the biggest.
Let's focus our
the
attention
biggest
on the
ones,
problems.
and
on the
yeah,
real. On
there are
issue,
much bigger issues out there. And just to. The topic of commercial fishing comes up a lot. We've discussed it, and it's whenever I do any kind of interview or magazine article or something, like it always comes up, and people assume that we're against commercial fishing, and that's really not the case. We're, as IGFA, we got a few years ago certified, not accredited by the United Nations Environment Program, and we fully understand that people have to eat, a single billfish. You look at some of these fish on the wall, how many people that monster feed, like a lot of people. And so you go, this is not a concern for the United States, Australia, any of the developed world. Like this is the developing countries. I think the number is of 17% of animal protein for the human race comes from fish. So it's the kind of thing that, we have to understand that one blue marlin to a community on the African coast can feed a whole town almost, or like an island. I was talking with a group that was that putting tags out in French Polynesia. They were like, hey, we had a fish die. We brought it to the community and they had a party, to celebrate this fish. Everybody was eating it. It was amazing. Right. And it's like, that's the kind of stuff like you can't get mad at them, not the boat, but like the communities for, wanting the food. Like people have to eat. Commercial fisheries, are a necessary part of all of our lives. Right. But, the difference is there's a lot of illegal fishing. There's a lot of not well-managed fisheries. In the U.S., we have probably the cleanest commercial fisheries, the most sustainable and well-managed commercial fisheries of anywhere. I'd say the same for Australia, New Zealand, and certainly some European countries. But, there's a lot of lawlessness in the open oceans. Who's out there? Right. You can't cover the whole oceans all the time. And so there's a lot of illegal fishing happening. There's, fisheries that aren't managed at all. Right. And so, like, we talked about circle hooks. Like circle hooks will keep a fish. On a long line, circle hooks will have a better hookup rate than a J hook. And it gives you a chance to release a fish alive because it almost always hooks it in the mouth. Right. And so they're not really any more expensive than J hooks, but because all of these, like some of these fishers already have always used J hooks, they will use J hooks and then they'll kill a bunch of fish. Whereas, like, if they would just switch to circle hooks, they could release some of these fish alive. Some of the open ocean tuna fisheries could do a little bit better to like counting. Just submitting more information to the managers and the scientists to be able to figure out like how many are being killed, how many are out there, so on and so forth. All the kind of things we've talked about.
Well, on that note, because this will be my last question for you, real quick. I want to give you a time quickly to talk about the billfish research and conservation endowment that started here at IGFA a couple of years ago, right? And because we talked about some of the missing data needs, right? And like how governments do not focus or have a lot of priority given to billfish. It goes to like commercially viable species, more like tuna, swordfish, stuff like that.
Yeah.
So this billfish research and conservation endowment, if I understand it correctly, will basically fill that gap. Is that right? So.
Yeah. So this is something I definitely wanted to talk about. So thanks for reminding me on it. The so Tim Choate and Bob and Sally Kurz kind of came together and said, "What can we do for billfish?" And they made this, extremely generous amount of money available, which IGFA then matched. And so the goal of this was to create an endowment that would fund billfish research in perpetuity. So we have this amount now. We just matched it this year, and the plan is to have this money each year go out to different studies that will directly impact conservation. Like there's a lot of research that needs to be done, but rarely can you do something that directly feeds into management. The first study that we're doing this with, so the Great Marlin Race, obviously that's an IGFA program, that'll be part of it. But the striped marlin study we're doing first is this study that will look specifically at the size of first maturity of because that can change based on how exploited that population is. It can actually change the size of first maturity.
Gotcha.
Species adapt and evolve based on how many are out there and what's happening to them.
So they can become sexually mature earlier or later based on what's happening to that.
Okay. Exactly. And so that's a critical input for the assessment process. And in Cabo with Sofia Ortega Garcia at CCMAR down there, we've been working with her for a while on our roosterfish stuff. And I spoke to her, and she says, "We have all this data. We should update that estimate and then write an article. There'll be a journal article about it, and that'll update IATTC's estimate that they use in their stock assessment. But also, there's no minimum size limit on striped marlin in Mexico. You just keep one.
Right.
So this will be the first step to collecting the information necessary to institute a minimum size.
Very cool.
So if you can go catch a striped marlin this big there, and that striped marlin it hasn't replaced itself in the population yet. And so once you get to that size of first maturity, anything over that you assume will have hopefully spawned already. Ideally you would only be killing fish that would have spawned and hopefully replaced itself in the population.
Very cool.
So that's just the first study. There's going to hopefully be studies either each year, or every 2 years, and then this will go on forever, especially as this money, as the endowment grows. IGFA is continuously fundraising for this.
Right.
So as this endowment grows, we'll have more money for research, can do bigger projects, can do multi-year projects and all that.
I know IGFA, obviously, IGFA does a lot of different stuff, a lot of different species, around the world, but this specific is only for billfish,
Just
correct?
billfish, yep.
That's awesome.
Yeah, so it's a major step. It's something that I think the scientific community has heard about it. They've been reaching out because they're excited, especially in the current, landscape for grant funding from like governments and stuff, the uncertainty of what's going on relative to NOAA and all these different universities and all these different groups. For us to be in a position to fund research that is highly impactful and will actually result in improved ability to conserve billfish, like it's amazing. It's like it's so rare to be able to do this kind of stuff. And looking forward to seeing what happens with this first study and then figuring out what the next one's going to be.
That's awesome, man. Well, Bruce, we talked about a lot today, but I just want to say, I think you and we talked about that group of people that gathered at the symposium, 100 or so people. I mean, you guys are really kind of like the unsung heroes of this sport and this industry, in my opinion. You guys, you don't get the limelight. You guys are doing some stuff that, is a lot higher pay grade than me and a lot of other people can do, but you're doing it for the sake of the sport and for the sake of the fish, and yeah, it's a job, but I mean, you could have been tracking Olympic athletes. Or
I know.
So
Yeah.
there's obviously a passion in there too.
I appreciate that.
So no, we appreciate what you do, man, and it's always we've had this not this exact conversation, but we've had similar conversations like this, on a boat or at a bar or something, and I feel like I could it's always so cool to have a source of information. You're like, well, what about this? I wondered about that. What about this? And so I appreciate you coming on here, man.
No,
and,
I'm in the limelight. I'm on the Marlin Podcast here under the lights. This is awesome.
That's right. Well, we'll have to have you back, man. Thank you, dude. I appreciate it.
Thank you, man. This is awesome. Always good talking with you.
Awesome. Take care, man.